My name is Elysabeth Alfano, and I have something called the Dinner Party. It's a monthly event at City Winery where I invite different artists, musicians, directors, actors, dancers. We get together over food by one of the great chefs, a lot of them from Randolph Street, and we film this live and it's streamed on the Sun-Times website, and everyone in the audience gets to be a part of this big dinner party. They have the same food that we do from the chef, and we talk about a lot of the things we're going to talk about today. The creative process, passion, inspiration, how artists work through difficult periods, and we know Beethoven had some for sure. And we basically have one big dinner conversation, because the best conversations happen over food. So George said, hey, how'd you like to interview, bring in this group discussion, a bunch of different people from different perspectives, all about the passion of Beethoven, which is something I deeply believe in. So I, of course, wanted to do that. And let me introduce them, the people that we'll be hubbing with today. And this is Nick Bowling, who's the Associate Director of the Timeline Theater, which just does such amazing work. And they've got some wonderful things going on. Maybe you can also tell people quickly what you have going on there at Timeline, which would be great.
Yeah, I first got sort of introduced to the world of Beethoven with this guy here with George on a play called 33 Variations that we worked on last year. And just nominated for a Jeff Award, which is really exciting, for Best Production in Chicago last year.
Very exciting.
Very exciting indeed. And we have all sorts of things going on right now. We have a production of A Raisin in the Sun. You'll see a program, a little announcement about that, and a production of To Master the Art that's opening up at the Broadway Playhouse very soon, and all sorts of things coming in. So that's all very exciting as well. That's all about me. I'm a theater director. That's what I do.
Theater director, but he has a deep Beethoven connection. So the next man really needs no introduction, I'm sure, as you guys know. So George is, of course, a world-renowned pianist, but also he is the founder and director, right? You're still the director, or have you grown up?
I try to believe that.
Yeah. I'm sure it takes on a life of its own. I just realized the ceiling, how gorgeous is this? Sure, it takes on a life of its own, but he is still at this point in time the director and founder, of course, of the Beethoven Festival. So if you'd like to talk more about the festival, you can give a quick snippet.
Yeah. Thank you, Elizabeth, by the way, for being here.
My pleasure.
These seats are really comfortable.
Yeah, I know, you can kind of see it. I know. I know, it's so comfy.
Right. For those of you who are here, have you been to the festival before? You have? Have you?
No.
Have you?
What, been here before?
To the festival, our Beethoven Festival?
No.
So this is our third year. And first year we started in Pilsen in an old warehouse, and last year we were in an old church in Uptown. And this year we're here working with Merit School of Music, and it's great. It's been a project always that I believe deeply in for a lot of reasons. First, inspiring myself from Beethoven's own story, which really is the story of not just a musician, but humanists who really believe that his skill set could actually influence the course of history beyond just music, which is really quite spectacular. Someone, unlike someone like Mozart, who really didn't think he could change the world, Beethoven really thought that his music would go beyond his own lifetime, and he wrote it for those reasons, and really made it a gift to humanity, even though he suffered greatly to get it out. And that's very humbling to all of us, and anybody, anytime, when we think, what's life all about? What's the purpose of it all? Well, if you actually give something to the world, and certainly even on a small scale, but if it's on a big scale like Beethoven, think about what that has done for so many millions of people. When you think that people in Central Africa try to perform the Ninth Symphony on basically tin pan instruments, and you just think, how is it that they're so inspired by that? You may not even understand why that the music of a German composer in Vienna in the early 19th century could influence people from completely different cultures, whether they're in Africa or Asia or even in the Americas. But that's the case, and that's pretty extraordinary. That just really speaks to the emotions that link all of us human. And then the idea that Beethoven also had about not an Enlightenment period idea, which he believed strongly, which is the idea of brotherhood, which just means coming together as humans to create something and to live in peace. These are high ideals, but we'd be wrong to give up on those ideals. The world is full of problems. But again, we can let the problems take over, or we can try to build something beautiful and positive. And this is what this project is about. And it's something that we started from the ground up. And I claim the original idea, but most of the work that you see is the result of hundreds of people coming together for nothing more than but the belief in this ideal. Because we're not a fancy and rich festival yet. Hopefully, we will be at some point. But really, it's driven by people's sweat and care and passion coming from all over the world. It's really incredible that we're able to do this at the high level that we are doing it in terms of the production and the music and the art. Because really nobody else could do it without believing in those ideals. We have to believe. This is not an entertainment. This is not a show in that sense. Even though hopefully we give good shows as well. But there's that wider net that really makes a huge difference, and which is what compels all these artists to participate.
So I want to come back to that.
Yeah.
I want to introduce Sarah.
Right, that's the passion. Let me just finish up on that, and then you're right. So that's the concept of the festival, and that's why also we have so many arts integrated into the festival. There's not an accident. We work really hard to make sure that we have we provide an incubator space for different artists, whether they're classical musicians or rock stars, or visual artists, or design artists, or DJs, or in this case, as you're also doing a lot of fashion. These things are unusual for what people think of as a classical festival. This is not a classical festival. This is just a festival of humanity. This is what I think of. I'll leave it on that for now. You can introduce Sarah.
Yes.
Thanks.
So we'll come back to all of those themes and more, and even go deeper into them, and how they also affect both of your work. But of course, I do want to introduce Sarah. So I'm going to need some help maybe introducing Sarah, because I think Sarah actually, in what she does, her work probably is the best example of what the festival has to offer. So correct me if I'm wrong, I was reading on you, so you're a classical pianist trained and a classical cellist, but of course you do a lot with punk movements and improv, and you yourself teach, and therein is your connection to the Beethoven Festival, because you are the education director, but you also have gotten your master's in art studies and art at the Chicago Art Institute, and now you're doing a PhD in technical studies. So you can see really she is so cross-disciplinary, as is this festival, and she encompasses so much of what is taking your passion and then applying it to so many things in the world, and we'll get back to that topic hopefully as we discuss. But I really want her to sort of talk about not just her cool glasses, but how she brings the visual arts and music and technology all together. So that's fascinating. Go ahead.
What are you? What is this? How do you explain yourself?
What are you?
Right. So, my background is I have an undergraduate in music composition. I started with piano and cello as very, very young, and when I decided to go to college, I took my standard music theory, and I've always been very analytical. I started programming when I was 8, so from early childhood, music and technology have been hand in hand for me. And when I learned music theory, there's this mathematics in it that I fell in love with and decided I wanted to work with it. And being very young and inexperienced, my first thought was, well, composing. That's how you work with music theory. So I switched to being a composer and got my undergraduate degree in that. I don't fit into the typical classical conservatory box, and so I decided not to go on to the master's or the doctorate in music, because I wanted to explore these ideas, this feeling that math, music, technology, arts can be combined. And so that's where I did get my graduate certificate, actually, from the School of the Art Institute in sound. And I began really using code in an artistic way there, doing sound art.
Yeah.
And which led me, I fell even further, more deeply in love with code, and decided to get my master's degree in computer science. And that's, I'm now working on some thesis work that brings these things together. I'm finally, after more than 15 years of studying and exploring, figuring out how to bring them together. And because of all all this exploration and my curious mind, of course, I am interested in education.
Yes, right.
Because I want to learn. I'm a constant learner, and I want to pass on what I know. And so I teach piano, cello, music theory, composition, and one day I would really like to teach computer music.
Great.
Bring them together.
Great. So I think just as a jumping off point, you can see her passion and how she's taken that passion and applied it to so many things. I just want to say something briefly before I sort of open it up and pull us all in about this topic of passion and how stemming from Beethoven, but how they all have it in their lives. You say something to me that it's so interesting how there is math in music. Of course there is. And do you remember a long time ago, VH1, I think, had a push for music in the schools because music funding was going away, and they were having a lot of the contemporary artists say, well, music makes me a better reader, and music makes me better at math. And I always find that I'm not a musician in any way, shape, or form, but when I toy around on the piano, and I love to do it for many reasons, that I become a better reader, and my math skills and my reading skills are heightened because I have music in my life. And I was recently at a talk with Yo-Yo Ma, and he was saying, if you want the best businesses, and if you want the best businessmen, because you have to be innovative and thinking out of the box and sharp, you've got to have arts, because if you don't have arts education in your life, you're going to be thinking like every other Joe Schmo, and that business isn't going to be that successful. So it's really the arts that give you that cutting edge leg up, if you will. So I think it's really interesting as we talk about, one of the things you had said at some point to me is, why do we need the arts? We all need the arts because it pushes our lives forward in so many ways. Another tiny little tidbit, again, before I open it up to everybody, I took my niece to National in Memphis to run around before she went back to school, and we saw how rock and roll, for the first time, really brought together African Americans and whites. And I don't know if the civil rights movement would have been, I'm sure it would have been successful, but would it have been successful as fast as it was if you didn't have rock and roll? So again, the influence of the arts on our lives, even if you're not a painter. I'm not an artist. These three are all artists. I'm not an artist, and yet I don't know where I'd be without the arts. And I think we can sort of take that logic and reel it all the way back to Beethoven and how he really felt. And of course, George can talk to this much better than I can, and I'll give the floor to George. How he really felt that, yes, he was a classical musician, but that was going to change the world, and that passion was going to affect his life, and that ripple effect would affect so many other things. And we'll see how, of course, he was deeply amorous, and so he had passion in that sort of sense with the world. He had passion for music, but also about politics and human rights and education. And that passion, which started with music, went on in so many ways. So I'll let you guys kind of jump in from there. If you'd like to talk more about Beethoven and how that passion rippled on, or if you guys want to talk about your own lives and passion.
Before we respond, I should introduce this before I start recording. So the strange contraption on my head is the Google Glass device.
I'm going to move my chair a little bit
so I have to twist. I've heard about it. This it's not available on the market, so it's really an experimental device. And the way that we are exploring with it here at the festival is how can this device and how can technology on the bigger scale be used in the arts. And so, without further ado, I am going to go ahead and record our conversation. As an example.
On your glasses?
On my glasses.
All right then.
Okay, that's record a video.
And will we see this video somewhere?
Yes, sorry, thank you for reminding me. So I will be live video blogging, video and pictures as we go in real time to Google+, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. So look for Beethoven Festival hashtags. Look for my my tag is Sarah J. Ritch, and keep an eye out for it.
Okay, and then one more thing that I know. So the eye of that camera, what is it getting? So when you look at me, you're getting George too?
Yes.
Or
I'm getting George up until the end of that bench.
okay, so when you look out into the audience, if you look at them, you're getting that chair to this bench?
Yes.
Just so you know, like she's that's what's happening, yeah. Okay, wow, fascinating. So how much do you see the arts and technology come together.
How much do I see them, the potential, or as it is now?
Currently, as it is now, and I'm guessing that's going to grow, but
Right now is a very exciting time because, since I would say it really started to kick off in the mid-'80s, and there's a bit of dabbling, but now, and part of this is because technology is becoming so accessible for anyone. It's more affordable. There's a bigger push to teach people, how to code computers for the first time. Just about anyone can have a laptop or a smartphone, and so now there's a huge explosion of investigation in technology and all of the arts, in video work, in digital photography, and just digital still images and time images, in music, computer music, and in performance art. That is a big one.
yeah. Well, one of the things that's so important for me to see how art in its purest form, so we'll say acting and directing and music and dance, in its purest form. Hi, you guys, come on in. We are taping with Google
Glass.
So jump on in for conversation and video. So in its purest form, so a disciplinary art form that, let's say, stems from classical impetus and is all about the art form in its purest form. How that then translates to things like iPhones and things that we can all have, whether you're an artist or not, in your everyday life. And the reason I think that is so interesting is that, I interview a lot of artists, and in my everyday life, I'm always amazed at how some people are living their lives really with their fullest potential. And then I'm not interviewing artists, and people go to work, get on the L, sit in a cubicle, get back on the L, come home, and basically hate their everyday life, and they're not quite sure how to tap into their own personal potential. And so it's always exciting for me to see how technology can help us do that.
I can jump in there also in terms of technology, because Beethoven was very interested in technology. We forget that technology existed in the 19th century, but it did. He actually helped his good friend Herr Melzel to invent the metronome. Beethoven was the first composer who made use of the metronome to indicate the speed of his works, and so that he could make sure that someone trying to figure out his sonatas in London could understand what he intended specifically. And that was a new device. He was also instrumental, which is the proper word, in helping develop the modern piano. He was a huge part of the push, and he was in touch with all the manufacturers of pianos about what they needed to do to improve on the instrument so he could express himself the way that he wanted to. It didn't hurt that he was increasingly growing deaf in those years and became completely deaf, but that he wanted to hear, obviously, a bigger instrument. But even before he was deaf, when he was perfectly hearing, he was known for trying to push these instruments, these weak instruments, to their utter limit. We actually have a fortepiano modeled after a Graf, which was one of the manufacturers of Beethoven knew quite well in Vienna, that Chris O'Reilly will be performing on Tuesday. We just had it delivered next door. You can go into that room and see, take a quick look if nobody's using it. But it's a very, very light instrument. It's not powerful at all, and you can understand how Beethoven's frustration with those kinds of instruments. So, again, technology allows us, and we progress to express more things and deeper things. And of course, it can be scary sometimes. And people, even in those days, thought, "Well, what's wrong with the harpsichord? What's wrong with the fortepiano as it is?" At the same time, humanity has never stood still. So we can't really fight back. What we can do is we can shape the direction in which we go, but we can't say, "Okay, this is it. This is the next plus ultra of where we're at," and that will not happen. So we have to somehow move forward. We just have to figure out which direction. That's true for everything.
Yes.
But that's the technology side of Beethoven's approach. And of course, all his medical issues, he was always on the edge of medicine because he had so many problems, not just his hearing problem. He had other ailments, and he was always pushing doctors to try to come up with solutions for his problems. And because he was so famous, I mean, he was literally the most famous musician in his day around the world, of course he was pushing these doctors, and they were very interested in figuring out the cures for Beethoven. And so he had all these devices for listening and all these different things. Didn't always work out for him, but he tried everything. Interesting. But on that topic, maybe Nick can give a perspective on Beethoven, the man as he came to understand, which is interesting because I grew up in music. Sarah, as a musician, Nick came into it from a completely different angle and got to know Beethoven more recently in his life, and that's sort of an interesting approach to, okay, what does it mean to you now? What was your perception before?
And how it might have affected you. I'm curious, after working on 33 Variations, which, as you said before we started taping, has just been nominated for a Jeff Award. It's very exciting. So how has that affected you in your work the more you learned about Beethoven?
I think what I knew about Beethoven before were maybe 2 of the symphonies and a few of the sonatas, probably the most basic things. And what was exciting, I think, about working on 33 Variations was we were working on a play about these 33 little tiny variations on a single waltz written by a sort of a novice composer at the time, another composer from his time. And so what was fascinating to me was not so much the breadth of Beethoven's work that I learned about, but was diving into these 33 little variations and realizing how much of his life he spent on each one of those. And the kind of the revolutionary and enormous things that he was trying to do with a 1-minute piece, and how he took this piece and sort of exploded it and exposed every little aspect of it, and went further than perhaps anybody before him had ever gone, and probably anybody after him, in manipulating it, playing with it, maybe making fun of it at times, but also embracing it and loving it, and the joy of that and the innovation of that is really magical for me. And seeing a composer who, you have this idea of being classical. It's the same thing in music as it is in theater. These are very classical art forms, and it's interesting connecting it with technology. We are often afraid of revolution and anything that's going to really change the box, as it were. Technology today is doing that to theater, and it scares us. We actually fight technology often in the theater because, I don't say that so much of timeline, but much of theater fights it because it's an art form that theoretically could be done without technology, that you could do it in a blank stage with a fire and you could tell stories, right? Which is exciting in its own way. Not many people are doing that, actually, but
At Burning Man, they're doing it.
Yeah, right, exactly.
I should probably just say, because I think I introduced him before we were videotaping, so Nick is the Associate Director of Timeline Theater, which again is just nominated for a Jeff Award.
But anyway, so it's that, I think mostly I was taken by his revolutionary spirit and this, the incredible ability of mixing intellect with emotion.
Yes.
And that, I think, is really rare. I think all of us, as artists, generally come to something as a more emotional, intuitive type person or an intellectual, analytical type person.
Right.
And somehow Beethoven is playing on both of those fields, and you feel it and hear it and understand it in his music. That is exciting, and it makes you begin to understand why he is still considered one of the greatest artists of all time.
Right. Well, what I got from seeing 33 Variations, which I loved so much, was, and I see this with so many artists, and I was reminded when I saw the play, to be really an impactful artist, you have to be extremely detail-oriented and so obsessed with the minutiae, and yet have a vision for the art. So you have to be constantly going out and in your perspective.
Yeah.
And so
it's sort of like that same thing. It's, in a way, if you think of the minutiae as being this sort of intellect and this as being the feeling, the bigger of it all, it's that same thing. And he's a master at both. And some pieces you feel like, oh, he really was able to capture the big in this piece and in this piece the little. But then every once in a while he can also capture both of them equally, and that's something spectacular.
And he did this while he was under personal duress, and so that's also very amazing to me. He did this while
Was it ever?
was it ever?
Right.
Either trying to get his dead brother's son in his custody, or suffering from, unrequited love, or, political problems or health problems. I mean, he was always in this period of angst and grief and turmoil and unstable ground and class problems, issues that come up with his life, and never having enough money, etc., and people funding him, and yet he was able to, in a way, close it all out, think big, and not let anything deter him, and then get really quiet and personal. So amazing. But how has that affected you and what you do with Twilight Theater?
I guess it's inspiring is the main way it's affected me, and also remembering that what I'm always pushing us to do, and I think everybody at my company is open to this, is opening ourselves up to other disciplines, and oftentimes it's hard to do that. It's easy to get kind of caught inside the box. But just adding George on stage playing this music into this production, it forces you to think about theater in a new way. And it reminded me, this year we're doing a musical just because how exciting it was to be working with music again. And that's why we're doing a musical this year. Because to have those two artistic entities coming together again on stage, it was so exciting, and you sort of forget the excitement that can create on stage.
Did either of you see 33 Variations? No? Oh, gosh darn. Well, you'll have to.
How about you? She saw it twice. Very good.
Champion, she's making up for you.
2.5. 2.5. Okay.
So she's raising the average for the room. Great. Okay.
I don't want to know what happened on the half, but
the person I brought got sick in the middle and had to leave.
Oh no! Well, that happened.
So then I came back and
that was nice.
Terrific show.
Good.
It was beautiful, and you are now going to be doing Television Master of the Art.
To master the art of play about Julia Child, which is exciting because in some ways it combines two arts as well, which is cooking and theater again, and all on stage live, and it's a lovely play that'll be coming up opening in the next week at the Broadway Playhouse.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, this is one of the reasons, I'll go ahead and repeat this since now we're taping. This is one of the reasons that I started to do the dinner party, which happens once a month at City Winery, where I invite different disciplines together over food, and we discuss about the creative process because you can all learn from each other. And so it's interesting to be a part of those conversations and see. I've had many connections happen right on stage where, for example, one fashion designer was asked by the dancer on stage to recreate a whole new costume because he'd just been invited to perform at Kennedy Center. So, these connections happen, and when artists get together from different disciplines and realize they can work together, and how one discipline can help blow open another discipline, sort of what we were talking about with Beethoven, how he's able to blow open things. It's very exciting. So George, back to you, and you really are the scholar extraordinaire, I'll say, on Beethoven in a way that the rest of us maybe are not. So feel free to tap into how Beethoven has affected you, and then the arts as you see it in general.
Well, to try to stay focused on the tasks at hand, and part of the reason why we're doing this little talk is just to introduce a little bit of the festival, introduce Beethoven, introduce what drove him and what drives us. So hard to lose a lot of sleep.
George hasn't slept in a week, by the way.
Months. But increasing regularity. But just from a biographical, very brief biographical background. Beethoven was born in Bonn, 1770. His father and his grandfather were respected musicians in town. His grandfather was also named Ludwig, and was actually the music director for the whole court in Bonn. And very powerful man. His son was also a well-known musician, but not as well appreciated as our Ludwig's grandfather. And but he had a difficult childhood. He did not complete his education because he was so focused on music. Obviously brilliant from the start. Not a Mozart in the Mozart sense, but certainly someone who had a different approach to learning music and understanding things. He was much more, maybe less intuitive and more of a study. He really tried to understand his part in the trajectory of music history and figure out what his influences were and would be. And Mozart became a huge influence for him in his teen years, and he met Mozart on his first trip to Vienna when he was 17, 18, wanted to study with him, but he had to go back to bond to take care of his dying mother, who then died, and then after his mother died, he was stuck in Vienna as a result of having to take care of his younger brothers, and his father started drinking and not being a good provider, so Beethoven ended up getting gigs left and right just to pay for his younger brother's education and for his father's retirement. And then when he was able to secure a little bit more financial support, he was able to go to Vienna for good. And he got to Vienna just 6 months or 7 months after Mozart died, so he had to, his hopes for studying with Mozart were dashed, and he studied with Haydn instead, who was also a great composer, of course. But he had a few early years of great success. He was popular, he was invited to all the salons where he performed, he was the best pianist of his day. There were a lot of piano duels in those days, and he always won them. And he was sort of a rebel, he was definitely a Rolling Stone type, and yet he was invited everywhere because he was just such a genius. People recognized that despite his outbursts and his difficult personality. And sometimes he could be a jokester, sometimes he could be a misanthrope. And so you had these different sides, and people had to deal with all of that. I think most people had an appreciation of him as a person who knew him, but he had a lot of falling outs with friends and supporters. But everybody appreciated what he gave to the world, even in those days, and that's quite extraordinary. There are two moments in Beethoven's life that I think are primary to any biography, and they both come from. They're both in letter form. One is an incident that happened in 1802, where he realized that his hearing was really going in really the wrong direction, despite many attempts at treatment. And he had told nobody, or just a couple of doctors he was hoping to get treatment from. And he finally realized that he was not going to improve, which was a huge disappointment. He was 31 at that time. And he contemplated suicide very seriously once he realized this was an affliction he could not get out of. And he wrote a testament that was meant to go to his younger brothers, just to explain why he was going to commit suicide and what he was leaving to them and all these things. In the end, in the course of the letter, he basically explains why he also changed his mind about not committing suicide, which basically came down to the fact that he believed very deeply that fate, as harsh as fate was on him, was also dictating that he should get out as much of his inner feelings to the world through music as he could before he died. And he then wished that he lived as long as it would take for him to be able to get out what was in him. So that was really quite extraordinary moment. That's what we refer to as the Heiligenstadt Testament. That's where he was in Heiligenstadt, suburb of Vienna, when he wrote it. That's 1802. In 1812, 10 years later, and I'm not going to go through all the ins and outs of Beethoven's love stories, but in 1812, he wrote 3 letters in short succession over the period of 24 or 36-hour period to a woman whose name we do not know with 100% certainty. There are about 3 or 4 different options, historical options for what is possible. And he referred to her as his immortal beloved. And it's one of the most beautiful letters ever written, and you have it here on the back wall. It's been written out for us in English. It was not in the original language. But that's Beethoven writing on July 6th and through the 7th of July, 1812. And in which he basically also explains, which is interesting, it really relates to that testament. First of all, she was clearly an unavailable woman, most likely married unhappily. And clearly she was also in love with Beethoven, enough that he could express these kinds of sentiments to her without feeling or risking rejection. The main thing about this letter is that he basically says we should be together, like fate should dictate that we be together, we are basically right for each other. But at the end he also explains that when it came down to it, God had called him to art, and that had to remain his priority in life, and he was willing to give up personal comfort in the name of art. And this relationship, of course, never actually was fulfilled. We know for sure that whichever woman it was that is on the short list was not in Vienna after that period, that summer. And so either way, we know that didn't happen. So it's really quite a statement, for someone, a very sad life in that sense, but how lucky, again, are we to have those gifts. maybe Sarah can speak a little bit about the compositional approach that Beethoven had over the trajectory that he had over his life a little bit before we finish.
Beethoven was one of the composers that I fell in love with in my compositional studies. And part of that was the momentum that he moved forward in his own style. He was always pushing his own boundaries, and we know that there are three main styles of Beethoven: his early, his middle, which is heroic, and that's about the time when he was really having some of the technical issues. And I feel like that heroic period was him just expressing frustration and the will to persevere through all of these issues he was having personally. And later in life, during his late period, he became very experimental and intellectual in his writing, especially in the late string quartets. Those, just to listen to them is fantastic. But if you have the opportunity to ever do some study, whether you yourself are a musician or if you have someone who can lead you through it, the techniques he's using is almost 20th century at times. And when I studied those, I just thought, well, I could spend a lifetime studying these three late quartets. And you'll find throughout his writing, he was very dynamic and very groundbreaking, and no one could write an ending for Beethoven. He had this, his music has this way of taking what could be a simple ending, a two-chord cadence, and spreading it out over maybe 5 minutes. And you're not bored. Your attention and your anticipation is building and building, and finally you get this satisfaction when he finally gives you the ending. No one can do that with Beethoven. And so that in itself, when you're writing a piece, you want to start it off well, of course, but you really want to end it well. And I think that's with any time work of art, whether it's prose or poetry or theater or music. That ending, how do you really end it? And for that, you really have to study Beethoven. There's no one else.
Great, wonderful comment. So just studying his style of writing, even if you're not studying music, but just how he builds
The tension.
Yes, right. Yeah. Aha.
Right.
Fascinating, and that's affected you in your own work. I mean, again, I think of, we started out this way, I think of how you are so cross-disciplinary is very much just like the Beethoven Festival altogether.
Right, so I find a great deal of interest in this idea of tension mapping and how to maintain interest or have beauty just in the meta of anything, the form of something, and how you can map, the crests and the dips and anything really. And that, Beethoven was the master of that.
It's fascinating. Well, I want to, before I open it up in case you guys have any questions or comments, because really we are a small group today, so it's nice to get your feedback if you want to join in. I want George maybe can hit on us, or you as well as Education Director, highlights. I mean, of course, we'd love to go to every event for the next 9 days, but if there are some highlights, of course, it's today, 5 p.m., 77 West Washington, free concert. It's a Bach.
The Bach Passion, St. John Passion, that's the religious side of the Passion.
Yes, right. And Matthias Pincher is the conductor, so very exciting and free. 5 p.m.
And
Actually, I should interject because this one coming up, I actually have to duck out and go manage it.
yeah, in
But-
3 minutes, yeah.
Next door is a concert by a youth orchestra, and they're actually going to be playing some excerpts from Beethoven's symphonic works. So it's free. It's right next door. It'll be right after this. Beautiful.
And then after that, at 4 o'clock, if you want to learn more about the St. John Passion, Dr. Stephen Lepauw will give a little talk at the Chicago Temple where we're doing the Passion at 4 o'clock in the sanctuary. And then at 5 p.m., the Passion itself starts. We actually also have a huge fashion element this year, and there will be a tremendous fashion display with dozens of models and dancers at the opening of the St. John Passion at 5 p.m. So it's not just treasure for your ears, it's treasure for the eyes. And so we really hope that you can make it, of course, and if you have any friends who can make it, Be aware that Transformers is being filmed right now in the Loop, and there are several streets are closed around the Daily Plaza where we're going. So schedule a little bit of time to get there.
And then, of course, tonight, 9 p.m., Masquerade Ball right back here, 38 South Peoria. So get your tickets. It will be a very good time. Come with a mask. Don't come with a mask. It's up to you, but it will be very good. And then, of course, again, there are just events every hour for the next 9 days. You can always go to BeethovenFestival.org.com.
Beethoven Festival 2013.com.
Beethoven Festival 2013, Beethoven Festival 2013.com, and get your tickets and come and join us. Thanks everybody for being a part of this. I know that Sarah has to run to something else at 2 o'clock.
Maybe she can probably handle one question.
Great. If you guys have any comments, yes, quickly, comments or questions or sentiments, no pressure though. And if you think of it later, she will be around in 2
If
days.
you think of something later, find me on Twitter, Facebook, Google+, anything, engage in conversation. I am happy to talk on all of the various versions.
Yeah, if anyone's hooked up, it's going to be Sarah, so you can find her in a lot of places. Thanks everybody for watching live, and thank you guys for coming. Super appreciate it, and I will see you every hour for the next 9 days.